Most brands say they're sustainable. Here's how to tell. Hi, I'm Garrick with Eco-Stylist, and in today's video, we're going to teach you how to spot greenwashing in just 5 minutes. Sustainable, eco, ethical, you've seen these labels, but what do they really mean? If you're tired of decoding brand marketing, you're not alone. That's why we created this easy to follow, step-by-step process for spotting greenwashing red flags and identifying great brands you can feel good about supporting. In today's video, I'm going to give you the tools you need to spot greenwashing and identify leaders in sustainable fashion yourself. And once you've got the tools you need to be a greenwashing detective, if you still prefer an easier solution, I'll also show you a resource where you can find over 100 certified, vetted sustainable fashion brands. Let's get into it. Okay, so I'm going to teach you how to spot greenwashing in just 3 steps. Step 1. Is the brand Eco-Stylist Certified? At Eco-Stylist, we thoroughly research brands using our sustainable brand criteria. So if you don't want to do the work, we've done the work for you and already vetted over 100 sustainable fashion brands. So step 1, and the easiest way to know if a fashion brand is actually good, is to see if they're Eco-Stylist Certified. If you're not sure if they're Eco-Stylist Certified, the easiest way to do that is to go to our brand guide. I'll have our brand guide linked in the video description if you want to check that out. Now, once you're in our brand guide, the easiest way to see if a brand is certified is to search for that brand. And so on a PC, you can do CTRL F, or on a Mac, it's going to be Command F, search for the name of that brand. And if you see them in there, they're Eco-Stylist Certified, great. If you don't find the brand that you were looking for, that means they're not Eco-Stylist Certified, and that means it's time to go to step number 2 and dig a little deeper. Step number 2, check the brand's website for these greenwashing red flags. Now, we made this one-page green or greenwashing flowchart that I'm showing you to make it easy for you to reference this whole process, go through this whole process easily for any brand that you're investigating. Now, if you want to save this flowchart so you can reference it in the future, I'll have a link for you in the video description. This flowchart is within the article that we wrote, Green or Greenwashing, How to Tell if a Brand is Actually Sustainable in Just 5 Minutes. So I'll have that article linked in the video description so you can easily access this flowchart yourself. Okay. So the way these greenwashing red flags work is that if a brand is claiming to be sustainable and you want to find out, or if you're just curious how sustainable a brand that you're interested in is, you'll use these greenwashing red flags to evaluate the brand's website, right? And the way these work is if you see any one of these greenwashing red flags, that means, no, not a great brand, and you can move on. The first greenwashing red flag is no information about sustainability on the brand's website. So if you go to the brand's website and they don't have a sustainability page, there's no information about sustainability on their about page, and there's very little information about sustainability on their website at all, this is a huge red flag, and it's time to move on. Second greenwashing red flag, no or very little information about who makes the brand's clothes on the brand's websites. If the brand doesn't share any information about where their clothes are made and who's making them, this is a big red flag. Some examples of this would be not sharing anything about where their clothes are made, or sharing really little surface level information like made in USA or made in China without any additional context. Really what we'd like to see, is a factory list, name of the factory, photos of the factory, information about the workers, something like this. If there's nothing beyond country level, that's a red flag. It's not a transparent brand. They're not sharing the type of information they need to or should be sharing with you. Greenwashing red flag number 3, using all the right words, but not backing it up with action. This is like greenwashing 101, where brands are claiming to be sustainable, but they're not backing it up with any kind of evidence or proof. There's a lot of examples of this out there, but one notorious greenwasher is Quince. And we actually made an entire video about that, which I'll have linked here in the cards for you if you want to check that out. Some examples of the way that Quince does this is, for example, like they'll claim fair wages, right? But then they don't share what the wages are, they share no evidence that it's living wages, and they share no certifications like fair trade to support the fact that they're supposedly paying fair wages. Another example of how Quince uses the right words but doesn't back it up with action is that they claim to be a transparent brand, but actually have no transparency whatsoever into their supply chain. Greenwashing red flag number 4. Brands that have an eco collection but don't apply those same standards to all of their products. You've probably seen examples of this. I feel like virtually every fast fashion brand has done this at one point or another. You know, some examples being Zara's Join Life collection or H&M's Conscious collection. Basically, when a brand offers an eco collection, but it's a very small percentage of the total clothes that they're making, this is a greenwashing red flag and a sign to take extreme caution. Now, this red flag is a bit more nuanced, so let's dig into it a little bit. You know, you might be thinking, like, if a brand has an eco collection, maybe they're testing the waters with sustainability, maybe they're just getting started, you know, et cetera, right? And so yes, exactly, it's very hard to figure out the brand's true intention, you know, with these eco collections, but I would recommend taking extreme caution. And here's my perspective on it. Reason number one that I don't like eco collections is, like, at Eco-Stylist, we're looking for the best brands out there, right? The most sustainable and ethical brands. And that means those brands are going all in on their initiatives, right? It's not just one tiny collection that makes up a small percentage of what they do. We're looking for brands where it's all of what they do. Reason number two, like I mentioned, while there's a possibility that an eco collection is done with good intentions, there's also a possibility that it's done with bad intentions, right? And so what I mean by that is a brand might drop an eco collection because that small collection, even if it's like 5% of their products, right? It might make you feel a lot better about the brand and therefore, like, feel better about supporting the brand and shopping the brand when they haven't really, you know, made efforts to be a sustainable brand. They're just doing, you know, one small collection. So that's the reason that this gets into greenwashing territory, is that a brand can use eco collections to try to make you feel better about them, right, to mislead you. And that's why eco collections, generally speaking, should be regarded with a lot of caution. So if you're researching a brand and they had any one of these greenwashing red flags, that means nope, it's not a great brand, and you can move on. If they were free from all of these greenwashing red flags, meaning they didn't have any of these greenwashing red flags, then it's time to move on to step 3 and dig a little deeper. By the way, if you're finding this video helpful, please don't forget to hit like and subscribe to our channel. Your support means a lot, and it really helps us grow. Step number 3 is the brand addressing 3 or more important sustainability goals. Now, if you've made it this far in our flowchart, that means first of all, the brand was not Eco-Stylist certified, so you decided to dig a little deeper. Then you looked for greenwashing red flags, and they didn't have any of the greenwashing red flags. So now you're digging a little bit deeper, and you're checking to see if the brand addresses 3 or more of these important sustainability goals. So let's go over the goals. Number 1, living wages. Living wages is really important in the fashion industry because obviously everybody deserves a living wage, right? Meaning that they can afford to support themselves and their families. In the fashion industry, 100% of makers deserve a living wage, but less than 5% actually earn a living wage right now. So that's why this issue is super important. Here's some ways that you can check to see if a brand is paying living wages, right? So first of all, do they publish the wages? Do they share the wages that the makers earn? If they do this, then you can do a Google search for living wage in that area, right? Because living wages are going to be contextual to where it is, right? So if, like, you know where the factory is in China, for example, you can search for living wages in that region in China, and then you can see if the wages they shared are in fact a living wage. 2 other ways that a brand might provide evidence that they pay living wages. One of them is going to be fair trade certified factories for the makers. The other way is going to be if they share their wages relative to a minimum wage. So for example, let's say the factory is in Los Angeles, and this brand shares that all of the makers in Los Angeles earn 2 times the minimum wage in LA. Then you can obviously look up the minimum wage in LA, you can multiply it by 2, and you can look up a living wage in LA as well, and you can see if 2 times the minimum wage is in fact a living wage. Next one, sustainable materials. This is important because the materials and the fabrics that a brand use make up a huge part of their environmental footprint. So we want to see that brands are using sustainable fabrics. Things like hemp, linen, tencel, organic cotton, regenerative organic cotton, etc. If you're not sure which materials are more sustainable, we actually have a whole guide on the best and worst fabrics in fashion, and I'll have that linked in the video description for you if you want to check it out. But what we look for at Eco-Stylist is we like to see that more than half of the fabrics that the brand uses across their entire brand are more sustainable options like the ones I mentioned. The third important sustainability goal that we look for is transparency. So what do we mean by this? Well, when brands are transparent, at a minimum, they should be sharing detailed information about where the clothes are made. This means like the final production. So in the case of clothing, this would be like, where was the shirt sewn? Ways that brands do this really well is they might share the name of their factory if it's a small brand, If it's a larger brand, they might share their factory list because there might be multiple factories that do their final production. Something else we'll see, especially with smaller sustainable fashion brands like Adelante Made to Order, for example, is they might own their factory, right? They might only have one final production factory and they might own that factory, and that's what we consider vertically integrated. So if that's the case, they don't necessarily have to share like the factory name or the address, but they can share that they own the factory, they can share where it is, they can share photos of it, etc. Some brands like Known Supply even go above and beyond and share information about the actual makers, so you can meet the people that are making your clothes. Now that's the beginning of transparency. More advanced transparency is when brands share all of that information, but they share beyond that as well, meaning they share information about the rest of their supply chain. So like, where's the organic cotton coming from? Where is the organic cotton being, turned into fabric? Where is it being dyed, right? So when brands share information about the rest of their supply chain, that's even better and something else to look for as well. The next thing to look for is certifications. It's worth mentioning that certifications are not a requirement for sustainable fashion brands to have, as sometimes, for small brands, these certifications may not be accessible, but it's definitely one form of evidence that can show that a brand is doing a lot of good. A perfect example of this would be the one that I gave you earlier, like with fair trade certification, for example. Fair trade certification is one way that a brand can demonstrate that they're paying fair wages. But there's other ways that a brand can demonstrate this and provide evidence without that certification. Okay, so which certifications should you look for? Well, some of the ones you should look for in fashion would be obviously Fair Trade Certified. One thing to note is it might be Fair Trade Certified sewing, or it could be Fair Trade Certified cotton, right? These are for different parts of the supply chain. Other great certifications to look for in fashion would be Blue Sign, Okotex, GOTS, GRS, and SA8000, to name a few. Now, honestly, there's a lot of certifications in fashion. So if I start getting into each of them and what they mean, that's gonna have to be an entire separate video. But if you wanna know more about certifications, like which ones to look for and what they mean, we actually did write an entire article about that. So I'll have that linked in the video description for you to check out as well if you wanna learn more about certifications and which ones you can look for. Another important goal to look for from brands is carbon emissions reduction. Now, probably the most popular version of this that you've seen is carbon offsets or carbon offset certifications. Now, while that is a great start, we like to see even more. One way that brands can do that is by sharing their carbon footprint with you. For example, brands like Everlane share their carbon footprint in their impact reports. In addition to sharing their carbon footprint, obviously we like to see ways that they're working to reduce it and address it. If they can show year-over-year decreases in their carbon footprint, this is really great and really impressive. This is especially impressive if the brand's sales grew year-over-year, but their carbon footprint decreased. Now, there's a lot of ways brands can work to reduce their carbon footprint. One of the major ones is renewable energy at the factories, right? The factories are often a huge source of energy and carbon emissions from these brands. So if they're doing things at the factory level to reduce their emissions, that's a great thing to look for. Things like renewable energy at the factories, solar panels at the factories, etc. Beyond that, they can look at carbon reductions from their shipping, and they can even look at carbon reductions at their headquarters. For example, solar panels and renewable energy at their headquarters, which is obviously great. One thing to look out for, in one word of caution, is if a brand shares that they only do carbon emissions reductions at their headquarters, that might be a red flag. The reason being, while it's obviously great and better than nothing, a fashion brand has a big supply chain with a big impact, right? And so if they're only addressing emissions at their headquarters, this is a very small part of their emissions and not where the majority of their emissions are actually happening. Another important sustainability goal to look for is circularity. Now, this can be a complicated one, so let's get into it. If you're not sure what circularity means, essentially circularity is about the life cycle of a product, and it's about keeping that product in use and keeping it out of the landfill. This is obviously one of the biggest problems about fast fashion. The real truth behind fast fashion is that these products are designed to be disposable, right? They're designed to end up in a landfill. They're designed to keep you buying and buying and buying. And obviously this is not sustainable, right? Clothes ending up in a landfill, clothes ending up overseas. This has a huge negative impact on people and planet. And one of the ways we address that problem is circularity. Circularity means thinking about the life cycle of a product, keeping that product in use and out of the landfill. So in practice, what does this actually mean, right? Like, what are brands doing to address circularity? Well, let me give you some examples. And if I give you real life examples, that will help really illustrate this point. So one example is when brands take back their products and actually recycle them. One example of this would be Thousandfell, right? Where with their sneakers, when their sneakers wear out, you send them back and they actually recycle the sneakers and repurpose the materials. Now, one thing I want you all to consider with circularity is that circularity, right, is the full circle, right? And obviously the ultimate goal is perfection, but we don't want to let that get in the way of progress. So when we're looking for circularity, we don't need necessarily complete circularity, right? We need to see that brands are at least addressing part of that circle. And so here's some examples of that, right? So when a brand offers resale on their website, right, this is obviously not going to completely address and completely prevent, that brand's clothes from ending up in a landfill. But by offering secondhand sale of that brand's clothes on their website, they're hoping to address part of that, and they're hoping to reduce the amount of clothes that end up in landfills. Other examples of partial circularity include take-back schemes. So for example, like brands may not take back the product and recycle it completely into a new product, but they might take it back and recycle it in some other way, right? Lots of brands, including Pact and others, have examples of this, Known Supply, where you can send back your old clothes, maybe even from other brands as well, and they'll make sure those get recycled and taken care of so that they stay out of the landfill. Finally, another example of partial circularity would be repair programs, right? Nudie Jeans is a great example of this, where you buy a pair of jeans from them, and for as long as the jeans are alive, as long as you have them, you can take them back and they'll repair them for you for free in their stores. So that's 6 things you can look for from brands. At Eco-Stylist, when we're researching brands, we obviously look for a lot more than that, but these 6 things are big, hot button issues. This is a great starting point, and for doing your own research, this is going to get you a long way, and it's a really great place to start. If brands are addressing 3 or more of these things, this might just be your next favorite sustainable brand. If they're not addressing any of these 6 things, that's definitely a red flag, and we would not recommend supporting this brand. If a brand is addressing 1 or 2 of these 6 things, but they haven't yet reached 3 or more, that means the brand does have a real commitment in sustainability, and it's a start. I wouldn't say they're a sustainable fashion leader, but they are starting, and then I'll leave it up to you whether that's a brand that you want to support or if you want to look for brands that are investing even more. So that concludes our 3-step process for how you can spot greenwashing in just 5 minutes on your own. I hope you found this video helpful for how to identify greenwashing and how to tell the real ones from the fakers. If this video helped you see through greenwashing, please share with someone you know to help them shop better too. So now that you've got the tools you need to identify sustainable fashion brands, if you're thinking, I don't know where to start, or this is too much work, I've got good news for you, because we did the work for you. To get started, I'd recommend checking out our video on the top 100 sustainable fashion brands. I'll have that video linked here in the cards for you, so you can check it out. Thanks so much for watching, and until next time, dress like you give a damn.